You know, history doesn't always begin with explosions. Sometimes it begins with a single signature, one decision made in silence that reshapes the fate of nations. In the summer of 1914, Winston Churchill made such a decision. He seized two battleships built for the Ottoman Empire, ships paid for by millions of ordinary people. That act, bold, controversial, and unforgettable, didn't just change Britain's navy. It changed the entire course of the First World War. This is the story of Churchill's most controversial decision. In the early 20th century, the world was entering an age when people believed a nation's power could be measured by how much steel it could launch into the sea. It was the era of the dreadnought. Massive battleships weighing tens of thousands of tons, armed with giant guns that could hurl shells for miles. Every nation wanted one, because these weren't just weapons, they were symbols of pride, power, and prestige. Imagine this. Today, countries boast about stealth fighters or nuclear carriers. Back then, they showed off their dreadnoughts. These ships were the Facebook of military might. Everyone wanted to prove they were stronger, faster, more advanced. And at the very heart of that arms race stood Britain. London wasn't just the capital of an empire, it was the workshop of the world. Shipyards like Armstrong, Vickers, and John Brown didn't only build for the Royal Navy, they built for Japan, for Brazil, for China, even for Britain's future rivals. The world placed the orders, and Britain delivered, because no one did it better. Ironically, while other nations were secretly preparing for war, Britain was making money by building their ships. But that same industrial strength gave Britain something no one else had: a hidden wartime logistics network, a sleeping giant of factories, engineers, and supply chains ready to shift from commerce to combat almost overnight. I once came across a short note buried in the British Admiralty archives. A ship engineer had scribbled a single line: "We build ships for the world, but we'll take them back when Britain needs them." At first, it sounds almost poetic, but when the war finally came, those words became prophecy. June 1914. A gunshot rings out in Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, and within weeks, Europe's great alliances begin to move. Vast, grinding gears of steel and politics, all heading toward collision. That's when Winston Churchill, just 39 years old, serving as First Lord of the Admiralty, saw what few dared to say aloud. War was inevitable. Have you ever had that sinking feeling, when you know something terrible is coming, and yet you can't stop it? Churchill was living in that exact moment. While much of the British government was still debating, he was already acting. He ordered the reserve fleet to mobilize, refineries to secure fuel, factories to prepare ammunition. Quietly, efficiently, he made sure the Royal Navy could set sail at a moment's notice. Some later said Churchill saw the ghost of war before anyone else did. But Churchill didn't just see it, he moved first. And soon, he would make a decision that would shock the entire world. A decision made in the name of Britain's security, but one that would alter the course of the Great War, break the trust of nations, and change forever the fate of Turkey and Chile. Have you ever heard of warships that never fired a single shot, yet changed the course of an entire war? I'm talking about Sultan Osman I and Regia, the pride of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century. These ships were built in British shipyards, paid for with the hard-earned money of millions of Ottoman citizens. Every village, every city contributed. Even women sold their hair to help fund what was seen as the rebirth of a fading empire. The whole nation waited for the day those ships would sail home, gleaming symbols of national pride and renewal. But then, just weeks before delivery, war broke out. Churchill, already seeing the storm on the horizon, made his move. He ordered both ships seized for the Royal Navy. No apology, no immediate compensation. Can you imagine that? A country buys two battleships, pays in full, and then just as they're finished, their ally takes them away. For the Ottomans, it was humiliation. They called it a robbery in broad daylight. And soon, Germany seized the moment. They sent two of their own warships, Goeben and Breslau, as a gift to the Ottoman Empire. I still remember a quote from one of my professors at Cambridge. When a warship changes its flag, the map of the world begins to change color. And that's exactly what happened. Those two ships carrying the German flag entered the Dardanelles under Ottoman colors, and with them, they carried an entire empire into the First World War on the side of Germany. One decision, two ships, and millions of lives swept into a global conflict. Now, I want you to imagine this. If you were Winston Churchill, standing in that moment of crisis in 1914, would you have done the same? On one hand, he was protecting Britain's strategic interests, making sure those powerful ships wouldn't end up in enemy hands. But on the other hand, that single act pushed the entire Middle East into a century of mistrust and conflict with the West. As a historian, I often see that moment as a tiny crack on the map of world politics, one that slowly widened into a chasm over the next 100 years. Because sometimes the greatest turning points in history don't begin with cannon fire, but with a quiet signature on an office desk inside the Admiralty. Do you ever wonder, maybe history isn't always written in blood, but in ink, on the kind of document that changes everything? When I look back at the old naval records in the British National Archives, one thing always haunts me. Those two seized battleships, Sultan Osman I and Regia, never fired a single shot, yet they changed the fate of an entire empire. Turkey entered World War I soon after and lost almost everything. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The Middle East was divided. And Britain, once confident it had secured a strategic advantage, paid the price for decades to come, facing waves of resistance and geopolitical wounds that never truly healed. A former British admiral once reflected after the war, "We won a small battle, but lost an era." You see, in war, as in life, no decision ever comes free. Every signature, every calculation carries consequences far beyond what any human can foresee. I often tell my students at Yale, history never repeats itself, but it whispers to us every time we're about to make the same mistake. And if you look closely, the world today still has its own ships, symbols of power, caught between nations and rival interests. Are we once again standing on the edge of another Churchill moment, where one decision could reshape the entire world order? I can't say for sure, but I know this. History has never been silent. It only waits for humanity to listen. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because there are so many more stories like this. Hidden secrets and seemingly small decisions that ended up shaping the fate of the entire world.